Commenting on the local elections in the United Kingdom, they took place yesterday, the first Thursday in May. They always happen that day. So throughout Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England. So there were two county councils, borough councils, certainly in Wales, Scotland, and England. In Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Assembly. I don't think to local authorities over there. So your local authority, it will manage things like parks, playgrounds, repairing minor roads, not motorways, street lighting, rubbish collection. It's got some indirect control over education and policing, often providing care to the disabled, to running old people's homes, things like that. Um, licensing pubs, restaurants, shops, and hotels, granting planning permission or withholding planning permission needs to be built, traffic management, putting up cycle lanes, public libraries, public swimming pools, playgrounds, authorising concerts, sports matches, things of that nature. But a lot of its funding comes from central government and turnout's often quite low. Remember, max. Now, some people say that's bad. The local government should be able to increase as much as they want. And then different parties could offer people a different vision. You can vote for my party, will increase taxes a lot and improve public services a lot. You can vote for my party, we won't increase taxes much, we might keep them the same, we might even shrink them, but there'll be less in total public services. And there'll be two visions, a high tax and high spend, and a low tax and low spend vision to vote for. But voters aren't really offered so much of a choice. Anyway, so there are roughly 20,000 local councillors in the United Kingdom. About 4,500 of them are up for election this year because although these elections are every year, they're not in every borough every year. They're not in every county every year. It's 1 year in 4. So roughly a quarter of them are. And this year happened to be a year where fewer than average were up for re-election. So that those who got elected this time, they won't face election again until 2016. And previously, there weren't elections in those areas since 2018 to local government. Anyway, so it's been a bad night for the Conservatives, as was widely trailed. So of the 4,500 seats that were up for election, the Conservatives held roughly 2,000 of them, and they've lost about 340. Bear in mind, not all the results are in. For very rural areas, because the ballot boxes are in polling stations scattered over a wide area, it takes a long time to bring them to wherever the counting centre is and actually count them. Is very close. They have to count more carefully because one or two votes could skew it. So the country's divided into boroughs or counties. These are subdivided into wards. A ward's got anything between 3,000 and 9,000 voters, not people, voters. Because of course some people don't have the right to vote. Their children, or they are in prison, or they're not registered to vote for some reason, or they're homeless, they're detained under the Mental Health Act, or the person is the Queen, or they're members of the House of Peers, or what's the other reason? Or you might be someone who's not a British, Irish, or Commonwealth citizen. For instance, an American or a Chinese or a German resident in the UK. Oh, wait a second, I think EU citizens can vote for local elections but nothing else. Anyway, so the Liberal Democrats have had some really good news. They've gained 190 seats in England alone, few in Wales and Scotland. The Greens have gained a lot. So and Labour has made major gains in London. They gained 3 boroughs, because remember London's 32 boroughs, including the City of London. The City of London being a very small area, square mile around St Paul's Cathedral and the Bank of England. Although Labour actually lost 1 borough in London, Harrow, the only London borough the Conservatives have gained. The Liberal Democrats, they've not gained any boroughs in London, but they've hugely consolidated in Richmond. In Richmond, there are 54 councillors. Conservatives have got 1 left, down from 10, and Labour have got 2 or something like that. Oh, no, the Greens have got 5, Labour have got none, and the Liberal Democrats have gone up to, I think it's 48 out of 54 councillors. 48, it's staggering. The Liberal Democrats, they've consolidated their hold on Kingston upon Thames. So anyway, so Keir Starmer, he's hailed Labour's success, but although Labour did very well in London, outside of London, their gains in England were very minor. So it's not the triumph that Labour might like to think it is. So yeah, the Conservatives have sustained in London pretty bad losses. The rest of England not as bad. Yeah, I mean, it looks Labour has not gained that much in the red wall seats. There's ones they lost in 2019. That's for a parliamentary election. assumed that they'd be doing well this time, that these are necessarily going to come back to Labour next time. And I think some of them will go back to Labour for Westminster. Obviously, a local election is not a Westminster election. You might think the Conservatives are fantastic at local level, but dreadful at Westminster level. I'll vote Conservative for the council. When it comes to Westminster, I'll vote Labour, or something like that, the other way around. Remember when I lived in Oxford years ago, 50 people on Oxford City Council, not a single Conservative amongst them, even though the Conservatives were actually reasonably strong in the city and held one of the two parliamentary seats of the city. The Conservatives were good for Parliament but dreadful for the local council. Anyway, so what was I going to say about other things? So why are the Conservatives doing so badly? Well, 12 years into a government and 2.5 years into a parliament, you'd expect the ruling party to do quite badly, and this is no exception. There's also Partygate. Conservative activists found they went down very badly on the doorstep. What about Boris Johnson and his lockdown parties? And people not willing to talk about local borough issues. And people often emphasise there were local Conservatives trying to distance themselves from Westminster. And it's true, this is not a Westminster election. But nevertheless, send a message to Boris. That's what the Liberal Democrats, the SNP, were saying, and so on. So a few Conservatives, actually surprisingly few, have said that Boris Johnson should tender his resignation. But the chairman of the Conservative and Unionist Party, Oliver Dowden, said it'd be the wrong time to change leader. Remember, this is a very disingenuous argument that he has to remain because we can't change leaders during a war. Well, first of all, the United Kingdom was not at war. In the Second World War, the UK changed Prime Minister twice, from Chamberlain to Churchill and then Churchill to Attlee. In the First World War, changed from Asquith to Lloyd George. That's absolutely nonsense. Anyway, in a sort of similar situation, they're up to the Gulf War. The Tories dumped Maggie Thatcher and brought in John Major. Anyway, the SNP has done pretty well. It's the largest party in Edinburgh, a city where it was relatively weak. Wandsworth, which was a Conservative-held council since 1978, Labour have taken that. That was a real flagship, even in the dark days of the mid-90s, when the Tories lost almost everything. Wandsworth was true blue. Labour have gained Westminster, a city, as in that's actually a borough of London. So that was really good news for Labour. They haven't had that one for about 15 years. It's a pretty bad night. So people predicted the Conservatives are going to lose up to 800 seats, but as I say, they've lost 350 or so, and not all the results are in. So I predicted losing about 400. Looks like it's going to be a bit more than that. So the Conservatives control only one council in Wales, Monmouthshire. Monmouthshire sometimes been counterpart part of England, and that's been lost by the Tories. So anyway, there was a guy in Tower Hamlets, that borough in East London, Lutfur Rahman, who was removed in 2015, banned for seeking office for 5 years for fraud, and he's actually been re-elected as a councillor. He's defeated John Biggs, who was a sitting Labour mayor. Right, so that's enough about that. And the Northern Ireland election, I think I'll talk about that separately, the election to the Assembly. Right, thank you for watching. So if this were played out in a general election, it's been extrapolated from this that the Tories get 30% of the vote, which is dreadful, even worse than 1997 for the Conservatives, that annus horribilis from a Tory perspective. And Labour will get 36% of the vote, which is not very good, actually. It's not dreadful. I know with 35%, Labour won a clear majority under Blair in 2005. And the Liberal Democrats will be on 19%. Now, their best result since 2010. They would gain dozens of seats of that. In the middle, they're starting from a very low base. Is there anything else I should point out? And the Greens did quite well. They often do quite well mid-term local elections. So, the Liberal Democrats have really done expectations. Yeah, they're one. They are the biggest party, but they've not really run away with it, as you might expect. Mid-term blues of the Tories. It's been a bit of a Kiev bounce for the Conservative and Unionist Party, being able to divert attention from domestic discontents and shortcomings, all their travails here, by looking at the Ukraine situation. Boris Johnson jet around the world, playing the global statesman. But that's only going to work for so long. This Ukraine conflict may become, to some extent, the new normal, as it is protracted for months, possibly years, and it will lose salience, and people will begin to count the cost of inflation, of higher food prices, fuel prices. Partly, I know he didn't cause the war, he's right to be supporting Ukraine. Right, thank you for watching my video. Toodle pip.